Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sporting Fan Podcast. Today I'm speaking about the sacking of Anthony Seibold. Now, late last night, the Seagulls made a decision to sack Anthony Seibold. They're actually going to do a press conference by the time I finish this podcast. They're going to come to the media, but they sacked him in 3 games in, so the Seagulls have, as much as this is end of round 4, they've had their round 4 game, they've had a bye. So they've only played 3 games this year, but all 3 games were at home, and they've lost all 3. They were competitive round 1, they lost in Golden Point to Canberra. But since then, they've had 2 pretty heavy losses. They lost comfortably to Newcastle in round 2, and then they had the bye round 3, and then they've been, the Roosters beat them pretty comfortably in round 4. Now, people will say that round 4 game was, the Roosters just scored on a streak and they scored something like 3 tries in 5 minutes and blew Manly out of the water. But really, and they were actually leading at halftime, Manly, in that round 4 game against the Roosters. But if you actually watched that game, for the most part, other than the opening really 2 or 3 minutes, 5 minutes of that game, the Roosters were on top. Yes, I know, like I said, Manly did go into halftime up, but that was more that they scored a try 30 seconds into the game, and the Roosters had trouble scoring. The Roosters were dominating majority of the game, that first half, dominating. Then they just couldn't. They scored 2 unconverted tries. They just couldn't get over the line, and then Manly scored another long range try from about 60 or 70 meters, whatever it was. They scored a long range try. Both their first, and they went into the half about 10-8 up, and both their first half tries were long range tries. They were, the first one came, they were about 20 meters out, ran 80 meters. Set piece move, and the other one, like I said, was about a 60 or 70 meter try. So they only had something like 5 tackles in the opposite Roosters half, the whole first half. They barely could get over the halfway line, and really, I looked up a few stats before doing this podcast. So Anthony Seibold has been really coaching since his first head coaching role in the NRL was South Sydney. And that year they go on to, that was in 2018, they go on to a prelim final. They end up getting knocked out by the Roosters, and who would later win the comp the following week against Canberra. Against Melbourne. And so he had a good year that year, and he had a winning record. But once you look past that year, he still had another year to go on his contract. Wayne Bennett at Brisbane also had another year to go. And then people often forget this. He kicked up a stink because basically they were going to swap at the end of I believe it was supposed to be the end of the 2019 season. They were basically going to swap. So Seibold was a coach at South Sydney. Wayne Bennett was a coach at Brisbane. Now, Wayne Bennett signed a contract with South Sydney. Anthony Seibold signed a contract with Brisbane, and that was for the 2020 season. But the whole pre-season leading into the 2019 season, he was kicking up a stink saying, I want to coach Brisbane now. Now, there's two sides of that. One, who cares? Like, you've got a contract for 2019, see out the season and go to Brisbane. But what is it? Well, yes, that does give a good. The first side of that, it gives a good, good message to Brisbane saying, like, I'm ready to go now, I want to coach Brisbane. But then the other side of that is, what does it say to your current club, the players, the other coaching staff, the sponsors, the, all that, the club management, that you don't want to be there, you don't want to coach the club, and really, if you like that, you're probably not going to give, 100% into doing what is best for that club. So, I just think, and I don't think it's a great look, because, if something happens like that again, well then, where you could potentially, what you consider a better offer, which is, I'm sure why you wanted to go to Brisbane, because, while South Sydney is one of the biggest clubs in the NRL, as much as I hate to say it, but they are one of the biggest clubs in the NRL. He was going to what was then a one-club town. Basically, I know there's now the Redcliffe Dolphins, but they only came into the comp a few seasons after that. So he had the whole, whole of Brisbane supporting them at that time. And so it's a different ballpark game, and the way that Brisbane supports their team is different to really any other club, including other Queensland teams. North Queensland to a lesser extent is a bit like that, but not to the same passionate degree that that Brisbane supporters are. And so he probably wanted all of that. And eventually he got his wish. A year earlier than what they expected, Bennett and Seibold swapped clubs. And that year, Brisbane go on and they make the finals. And they finish in 8th position in 2019 in Seibold's first year as coach. The only thing with that is the first week off the finals, they play against the Parramatta Eels, and they end up getting absolutely trounced. They end up getting beaten 58-0. It is a record loss for Brisbane. And it's a record loss for any club in the NRL. It is, I believe in saying, I'm still right in saying this, that is the biggest loss in NRL history in the finals. No other club has been beaten 58-0. Now, so it doesn't look exactly great for Anthony Seibold. They getting beaten 58-0 first season. As much as he made the finals, getting beaten 58-0 first week of the finals. Souths go on to finish 3rd that year. So, that they end up having, another good year under Bennett. and while he gets knocked out first week of the finals, and South make another prelim final that year. They got beaten by Canberra. South still. So it looks more that 2017. Yeah, sure. South didn't have a bad year that year, but it wasn't as good as what they had been previous years. They just missed out on the finals that year. Actually, am I right in saying that? Sorry. So they finished 12th that year. So they were a bit off the pace that year in 2017. South Sydney. So they didn't have their best year, but Seibold comes in. They probably did need a change of voice, South Sydney, that year. I know Madge Maguire, who just funnily enough, the roles were reversed at the connection between South and Brisbane. The last few years, there seems to be a recurring theme around South Sydney and Brisbane. Which I'll get into in a minute. But Madge Maguire he took South Sydney to the premiership in 2014, and then they did fall back a bit after that. But so they probably did need a change of voice that year. They got the change of voice. They go to a prelim final. But then, like I said, there was that whole situation with Bennett and Seibold. They swapped. Come 2020, obviously this is the COVID year. Things don't look great for Brisbane. So, like I said, biggest ever defeat for Brisbane was 58-0 against Parramatta first week of the finals. Worst finals loss ever. In the NRL, worst loss for Brisbane. Then, COVID happens. So the NRL was only 2 weeks. They had finished round 2, and then COVID happens, and then it basically goes into the competition goes into lockdown. Then, when the competition comes back up, Brisbane have their second game back was against the Sydney Roosters. Now, it seemed all good, but they end up getting beaten 59-0. So they come back after the first 2 rounds prior to COVID. They had 2 wins. So they beat the Cowboys 28-21, and they beat South Sydney 22-18. Then they come back after COVID. So the first game is against Parramatta. So you would think they should be able to get up for this game, especially considering the games at Suncorp Stadium. It's a team that beat them 58-0, absolutely embarrassed them in the finals. You think this is the best way to go, okay, we want to get revenge on Parramatta. We want to show you that, yes, we were embarrassed, but it's not going to happen again. Come back after COVID, they get trounced 34-6. The following week, they play the Roosters, and they get beaten 59-0. So, the record of their record defeat of 58-0 only lasts 4 games. The four games after that match, they get beaten 59-0. And they would go on to win the Wooden Spoon that year. They would barely win another game all season. They had an absolutely... It's the first time they had ever won the wooden spoon. And yeah, their season was absolutely woeful. And because they had a lot of heavy defeats that year. Because it wasn't like, you can win the wooden spoon and go, oh well, they had at least they were competitive in games, right? They weren't competitive. They only won after it was a shortened season, so there was the 2 games pre-COVID, and then there was 18 games after. So there was only 20 games all season. But after the COVID break, so like I said, they won the first 2 games. Post-COVID, they only won 1 of the remaining 17 games. 18 games that they had. And they had a lot of heavy defeats that year. They got beaten by the Gold Coast 30-12. They got beaten by the West Tigers 48-0. They got beaten by the Storm 46-8. Canberra beat them 36-8. The second game that they had against against the Roosters, they lost 58-12. They had a lot of heavy defeats that year, and the only game that they won was against the Bulldogs, and yeah, they were woeful, and they just never came back after COVID, and obviously Anthony Seibold ended up being sacked that year as a result. And I know there was a lot of outside noise. Brisbane has a very strong old boys culture, but at the end of the day, they couldn't, he couldn't really argue much against what they were saying. And yeah, they were just, the results were terrible. And first wooden spoon, heaviest finals defeat, so that's why they got rid of him. And he goes to Manly, and to be honest, not much. Has he got the wooden spoon? No, but I don't think that they've really. He hasn't really performed well there either. I know he's made the finals a couple of times and that, but over the last few years, he hasn't. In comparison to where he was, where Manly were when he took over, they haven't moved forward. Because this is the question that people always ask with coaches. If the club is not performing, the number one question you always ask is, well, you should ask if you're going to get rid of a coach, is if we sack our coach, who is better? Now, Des Hasler was the coach. They get rid of him, and they go with Anthony Seibold. So the question everyone has, well, is Anthony Seibold better than Des Hasler? Des Hasler has gone to has taken clubs to 4 grand finals. He took, Manly to the 2008 and 2011 grand finals, won both. And he took the Bulldogs to the 2012 and 2014 grand finals, which they both lost. But, he is a very successful coach, Des Hasler. I know the back half of his career he didn't have the same success that he did at the first probably decade of his career, but he still was a 2-time premiership winning coach. and they replaced him with Seibold. That his last coaching gig, they finished last. So were they replacing him with a better coach? And I would happen to argue that they weren't replacing him with a better coach. They were only replacing him with a bloke that was basically the only bloke available. And, when I looked at it, I just think Manly went into it with they didn't completely do their due diligence. I think there was things that they overlooked. There was a lot of problems, there at, Brisbane. He had the stoush at South. Just like he's got a record, right? And they just seemed to overlook it, and they ended up. And I think that's where they've, it's come back to bite them. And a lot of people say, "Oh, when you sack your coach, your season's over." That can be true in some senses. I can see where that argument is. But then there are other times where you can actually turn the season around. If you can't sack your coach mid-season. An example of that is in the Roosters in 2007, for example. Chris Anderson was coach. They were basically running dead last, and midway through the year, they sacked them. Brad Fittler comes in, and second half of the season, Roosters really pick up. They win a lot of games and very nearly make the finals. They, I think, finished around 10th that year. It was only that they lost. I think they needed to win all three of the last 3 games, or they needed to win 2 of the last 3, and I think they lost 2 of the last 3, so they ended up just missing out on the finals. And which after the first half of the season, where they barely won a game in the first 10 or 12 rounds, was an incredible turnaround. And so it can revitalise, change of voice at the club. I did see before coming on this podcast that it looked like Kieran Foran might be the caretaker coach until the end of the year. I think they're kind of throwing him to the wolves here. I don't think that's really fair on Kieran Foran if he is appointed to as interim coach, caretaker coach, for the rest of the year, because he only retired last year. I know he was not at Manly last year. He was at the Gold Coast, but he's only 2 seconds into a coaching career. He's only had 1 pre-season plus 3 matches as an assistant. I just think there's surely another assistant coach there that can come in and do that, because that's a lot of pressure on Kieran Foran, on a new assistant coach. And personally, I think that could, really derail his coaching career, because he just hasn't got the backing on. And people will say, well, yeah, sure, he's an assistant. He's only new to an assistant coach, and he's been coached for the last. He's been playing for the last 15, 16 years, 17 years, whatever it was. And he'd been playing, so he could see what they were doing. But it's one of those things where you can see what someone does. They go, oh yeah, I can see what they're doing. But then there's another thing where you're actually doing it. Is the experience, and that's where you have different levels. different levels of people, where you can see. Think about it in your own workplace where you got someone with experience and they go, oh, this is how you do it, bang, 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 and they do it something really quickly, but then you go, okay, you do it, and that person ends up having no idea. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that person is stupid. It just means that they've never done that task before. And yes, they may have been taking notes on how this person has done a certain task. But it's different between seeing how someone does it and actually doing it yourself. Because, you can, have that. And I just think that, and of course that means, people will say, oh, well, Kieran Foran's gotten the knowledge, you don't know what you've got until you've been thrown into the deep end, and it could make Kieran Foran. If he turns Manly around, even if they don't make the finals, let's say, they've got 21 more matches after this. I know there's 27 rounds in total, but each team plays 24 games. Yeah, let's just say he ends up winning 10 games, they lose 11. And so it's a respectable, I know it's a losing record, but it's a respectable record. But it could make Kieran Foran, and people go, okay, it could show other coaches that, other clubs that maybe we want him on our assistant coaching roster, next year, in 2 or 3 years, like maybe, for example, South Sydney, could have it where Wayne Bennett's getting on a bit, he's 70, well into his 70s. Melbourne could look at him because Craig Bellamy is getting up in age. Even the Roosters could look at him. While there's no suggestion at the moment that Trent Robinson's moving on, a lot of supporters are saying there are supporters, and this is going to be ironic considering the Roosters was Anthony Seibold's last match as coach, and then the Roosters poached one of his assistants straight after they beat him, and was a straw that broke the camel's back. But the Roosters could look at him, and have, for example, give him 2 or 3 years under Robinson, and then move Robinson into a kind of like a Phil Gould kind of role where he's the head of football, managing pathways, trying to bring talent in, like that kind of role, and move him into that because at the moment because by all accounts and purposes, Trent Robinson has a very good relationship with Roosters chairman Nick Politis, so it's unlikely that unless the Roosters got like back-to-back wooden spoons or something, he's probably unlikely to sack Robinson because they've got a very close personal relationship by all accounts. But he might say if the Roosters are just scraping into the finals year on year, a lot of fans are saying that the Roosters need a change of voice. The Roosters the players are not responding like they did, 7 years ago when they last won a comp. They haven't finished in the top 4 in the last few years. They're not making a prelim final. They have a bad record against Penrith and Melbourne. They've only beaten, I think, both Penrith and Melbourne, I think either once or twice in the last 6 or 7 years. Basically since the 2019 Grand Final. I think they've beaten Penrith, I think, only once or twice. I think they beat them once last year. I think that was the first time they had beaten them since about 2020. And they've got a very similar record against Melbourne. I think they've only beaten Melbourne about once or twice in that same period. So they may, players might go, well, we'll move you into it might be consider a promotion. Robinson might see it as a demotion, but they just basically move him across into another role and put Foran in as head coach. These are all different possibilities. Either you have another club that is struggling where they bring a bloke in, but these are all options. Obviously, this is all theoretical for Foran, but I just personally think it's a bit unfair, putting a bloke in when he's only been assistant coach for 3 matches to put him in as caretaker coach, because it could sink him. Because what happens if he only ends up winning 3 games all year? It basically says, well, everyone's just going to say, well, he can't coach, even though there's a whole disruption. He didn't have, he wasn't ready for it. He said on Fox Sports last night that he was blindsided by it. They had a review of the match, yesterday morning. They had a review of the Roosters game that morning, and they were preparing for training on Sunday, apparently tomorrow. And then he comes in to do analysis for Fox Sports. And then he gets told while he's doing analysis for Fox Sports in between games, that Anthony Seibold has been sacked. So he doesn't even get a heads up in advance that he's taken over. So, I just don't think it was... Do I think it was the right decision to move Seibold on? I personally think it is. Personally, I think Seibold was isn't. I just don't see him ever winning a premiership with a club. I don't see him ever taking a club to the next level. But in saying that, on the flip side of that, I think it's unfair on Kieran Foran putting him in as an assistant coach. As caretaker coach at this stage. I think it should be one of the other assistants. Where they go from here is anybody's guess. There's going to be a lot of tough decisions at Manly because if you look at a couple of their players, they're getting on a bit. Jake Trbojevic has had a lot of bad head knocks the last few years. The stats that he's dished up this year are pretty ordinary. It's going to be a pretty tough thing for Kieran Foran. Kieran Foran's played, as much as he was at the Gold Coast for the last few years, he played with a lot of these, he played with the Trbojevic boys, he played with a few of the other boys. So if there's blokes that need to be moved on and are dropped, it's going to be, midway through the year, it's going to be tough for Foran when he's got a close personal relationship with a lot of these blokes. He's probably mates with them. He probably went out drinking when he was playing with them. Or he at least socialised with them. So it's going to be hard for him to say, tap on the shoulder to, someone like a Jake Trbojevic who, if he hasn't been performing, he keeps performing like he is, saying, Jake, thanks for all you've done for the club, but look, you're just not at that level anymore. that's going to be an extremely difficult. Well, it's going to be an extremely difficult conversation for anyone, but especially someone that has played with Jake and is a great player. And look, Jake's always going to have a role there at Manly. Everyone knows that. He's a legend of the club. But if he's not at the level, and do you think it's fair on Kieran Foran? Do you think will Foran be able to make that decision? That's going to be the question. But you could potentially look on the flip side of that, where Jake may want to lift his game for a bloke that he used to play with. So there's all these scenarios. It's going to be interesting how Manly play for the rest of the year, because it's early days. A lot of people didn't think Seibold was going to be the first one to go, especially after he only signed a 2-year contract at the end of last season. So a lot of people a lot of people probably were thinking a more Todd Payton probably was going to be the first one to go, as the Cowboys have been underperforming for a few years now, with a pretty good roster. They got rid of blokes like the Hammer, which everyone was left scratching their head about why you would get rid of someone like him. But yeah, that's where it is at the moment, and yeah, it's something that a lot of people didn't see coming. I think people probably thought he was under pressure, but I don't think people thought they would pull the trigger this early in the season. I think most people were expecting him to be given until at least mid-year, and it'll be interesting to see who they give to replace Seibold, because I know that the whole KR coach was being spoken about as a potential the next NRL coach, but he was announced as the PNG Chiefs coach when they come into the NRL. So he's not there, and I'm not really sure who, because usually every few years, at the end of each year, you kind of hear who's going to be the next head coach, the next cab off the rank kind of thing. And for the longest time, it was always, there was Josh Hannay, there was Jason Riles, it was Craig Fitzgibbon, and those were always the three guys that everyone spoke about. Now, Craig Fitzgibbon's been a head coach for a few years now at Cronulla. Jason Riles got the Parramatta gig at the start of last year. Josh Hannay is now the coach, is now also a head coach at the Gold Coast Titans. So it's going to be interesting. Brad Arthur's name, the old Parramatta coach, his name's being thrown around. Michael Ennis is being thrown around. A lot of people think that he might be the next head coach. A lot of people thought he may be the next St. George head coach, but he's been his name's been thrown around. It'll be interesting to see if potentially Ben Hornby. I know his name gets thrown up every now and then for the next head coaching gig. So it'll be interesting. Brad Arthur, I think, is not going to be I don't think he will be, just simply because he said that he's happy at Leeds. Whether that's true or not, or whether the Sea Eagles can come in and convince him to come back to Australia. That's another thing. That's another story. But it's going to be interesting to see who they pick. Maybe it's another. They might get a left field selection. They might get another Super Leagues coach. I just don't know. It'll be interesting, and where it goes from here will be interesting to see where Manly goes. It'll be interesting to see how they go for the rest of the season. It'll be interesting to see if there's any player movement. If a lot of players go, well, we signed here for Anthony Seibold, he's now gone. We're gonna, if they've got any clauses in their contract saying if he goes, I go. It's going to be an interesting next, 3 to 6, or it's going to be interesting for the next couple of months until all this is sorted. So, stay tuned. So until next time, guys, thanks for listening. I'll be interested to hear what you think about this whole Manly situation. Let me know. And until next time, I'll catch you later.